Peace, greetings, welcome all. We are here for another Sabbath Insight. And of course, I am Chief Yuya, Chief Jegna of the ANU Life Global Ministries and the ANU Nation. And I welcome you, first timers, old timers, whatever's in between that. This strong, I want to build on the traveling man, the hidden path of the initiate. And I'm going to really focus more on travel more than the initiate aspect. I know a lot of times when we think of travel, we think of it just as movement, and the truest form of travel really isn't about location. The truest form of travel is about how the soul moves, the motion of the soul, which is initiation within itself. So this strong, I want to kind of take a look at us walking the path of the traveler, or what we call the seeker, and look at the one who refuses to stay still in a world that wants to make that person be asleep. In the Masonic traditions or teachings, you have this term, the traveling man. And that's usually one who's received light and is seeking more, seeking more light, and that light comes through motion, not necessarily physical motion, but spiritual motion. So in the ancient world of operative Masonic tradition, only those who were skilled with the craft of masonry were permitted to move freely from one town to another, and their ability to travel was like a sign of experience. It showed that they had reliability, it showed that they had expertise, and most importantly, they had spiritual integrity. Then you have speculative masonry. So in speculative masonry, the idea of traveling, it's more like it symbolizes more the journey from going from darkness to light, or pursuing higher divine order or higher knowledge. So master masons were ones who rise from the west to the east, and going from west to the east symbolized, going towards the sun or towards the light or towards the source. So today, when you're visiting different Masonic lodges, it represents, there's a brotherhood, but there's an ongoing quest for wisdom, right? So a traveling man is one who never stops moving and bears the Masonic passport, which is ink and seals, so it is a physical passport, but there's also the energetic passport of discipline, awakened insight, experience. So, we kind of ask, what is that light that is being sought after? If you look at it from an occultic perspective, the journey of the traveling man isn't always benign, in some conspiracy formulas, and I would say even esoteric circles, Freemasonry's symbol of light is not necessarily spiritual, it's Luciferian. The light bearer, Lucifer, or what they call Lux Ferre, and that's seen as a source of esoteric knowledge and the knowledge that unshackles the mind, but also rebels against the divine. That Lux Ferre, Luxferre, if you want to look it up. So the traveling man becomes more than a wise seeker, but is a threshold sort of figure. It's that person who walks between different dimensions, paradigms, different fraternities even, and is granted access to chambers that would be private, sacred geometry, ritual language, that the public is not necessarily meant to understand. So that person is a builder of temples and towers, but depending on the compass, that person is either building Babylon or is building Zion. And this is why not all who carry or all who travel necessarily carry the same spirit. Some seek to awaken the body of Yahuwah's people, and other people only they move to feed uh, their own hunger for power, you know. So the traveling man is supposed to be a man of knowledge, but knowledge divorced from righteousness is always a dangerous thing, as we speak about often. So when you reclaim the archetype, the true traveling man is not just one who's initiated into systems of hierarchy, but one who's initiated into remembrance. You know, the one who travels towards the truth and not just towards access, which you find so much in the conscious circles. People just want access. They want to get a book. And you can sell access. Oh, man, here's a book or these symbols that have been blocked off or banned, but you can get a copy of it, you know. So to travel is not necessarily to declare, I have not accepted um, truth, or I have not accepted your facts, or whatever. When you truly are traveling, you're accepting that I have not accepted the illusion around me as truth, right? That's the key. But it also has to be that I remember my covenant with the Most High, you know. So it's sort of traveling. It's not just being able to dismantle everything around you. Oh man, they brainwashing you here and they programming you here, and this is the Illuminati and so forth and so on. You know, true travel is also when you're accepting your pact or your covenant with the Most High. Um, I want to touch upon something. I said something earlier about people who walk between dimensions, and I've spoken about this many times, like, you know, years ago in different videos and podcasts where I've spoken about the zombie. And if you notice, for those of you who've checked out Last Strong's Insight, which, of course, if you have not, I encourage you to do. But in that particular insight, I showed many derivatives of the word zambe or zambi or nyambe or nyame, many of which where we will pull or we have pulled the word zombie from. You know, but of course, you're taught when you look at a zombie, it's only a bad thing. Just like if you look at a traveling person, it's only a good thing. And like I just explained, it could be a person seeking access to have information to build up um, the kingdom of Satan, or someone seeking to build up the kingdom of El Elyon. You know, it's not always the same thing. So if you're looking at the term zombie, it has deep roots in Afro-Brazilian, we will say, or West African spiritual traditions. You know, the word most likely comes from, it's a Congo word, most likely, in Zambi. And in Zambi means Elohim, or it means a god, for those who want to use those terms. Or it could mean a spirit of an ancestor. So, you know, like in Haitian Voodoo, you have Zonbi, Z-O-N, Zonbi. And that's a person who's been resurrected, but resurrected by a Bokor, or someone who's practicing left-hand magic. And they've not been resurrected to live, but they've been resurrected to serve, right? So the zombie or the zombie, if you're dealing with, again, the Haitian Voodoo, the person becomes a shell. They're animated by some force, but they're stripped of their will. In Candomblé and Umbanda, which you have in Brazil, you have similar sort of kind of entities where you have entities of people who are caught between dimensions. And a lot of times they're used as vessels by people who have knowledge of the occult. So the zombie or the zombie is not just like this fictional ghoulish sort of figure, but it's really a warning. You know, it's a metaphysical warning, or we could say even a reflection of what happens when the body moves, but the spirit is stolen. You know, zombies, as you see in all of your movies and stuff, they move, but they're not alive. In fact, they tend to move in herds. right? And they consume, but they don't transform. You know, they're the walking dead. You know, they're animated flesh that has no will. They have instinct, but they have no inspiration. You know, so many around us in the world, if you really think about it, many around us are moving the same kind of way. I'm sure maybe even the truth is what I just described. Some of you watching and listening might have said, "Man, I feel like that sometimes," or sometimes I think that's what my life is. You know, I'm moving on instinct, but I'm not inspired. You know, um, I'm not transforming. I'm not changing, though I am consuming. You know, I'm moving, breathing, but dead, spiritually dead. So for people like that, their days are very scripted. The days are very scripted. Their reactions are very programmed. They consume without questioning, you know, and they respond without any level of reflection. I can't tell you how many times in my work that I've had to work with people and I've said things like, look, I'm going to say something. And before you respond, I want you to take a moment to reflect. And as soon as I say something there, you can see that whether they're breathing like they're waiting to say, you know, I can't even say response, their reaction, or they just refuse to ever think about what someone is saying to them. You know, their ego is so encrusted that it's almost an offense to them to think about what another person is saying. You know, so you could say something to them and say, this has happened, or this is something that I've noticed, or maybe I feel this way about a particular situation, and please think about it before you say anything. And they won't. There's no thought. Their reaction usually is not even related to what you said, but what they'll say is, well, that triggered me. I was triggered. And people think that the word trigger is a legitimate defense, but it's not actually. Just because you get triggered doesn't mean that you have a justifiable reason to bleed all over other people because you were triggered. Because whatever you're bleeding on other people is what was in there. You know, if I tickle someone who is ticklish and they start laughing, joy a lot of times comes out because that's what they're bleeding. They were triggered to release their joy. You know, so if you're always a person who's triggered to offense, then what lives inside of you all the time is that angry program, you know, and no one should ever tiptoe around that. That's just my thing. I'm not tiptoeing around what anyone calls their triggers or whatever. If you have that much dysfunction within you, then you need to be tiptoeing around me. That's how that goes. But a person who's stuck in that sort of way, like I said, there's always response with no reflection. Um, they don't build anything. They only follow, you know, and it's not because they're inherently evil people. You know, when you're looking at a zombie, it's just because they're unconscious. They're unconscious. So a lot of times we fear, or we're taught to fear, the ghost um, of people. But there's ghosts that are walking among the living. But think about this. We can acknowledge that there are ghosts, and we have all kind of movies and campfire stories and, you know, all sorts of things that tell us to be afraid of ghosts that may show up in the land of the living. But what if you are the living walking among the dead? You know, if you can look at it that way for a second, you know, what if your consciousness, your breath, your memory of Yahuwah has placed you in a realm now because of that, where everything else around you is asleep. So, you know, it's not that the ghost is in the land of the living is in the land of ghost. If you can sort of imagine, this is my own insight and theory on this. So, you know, if it's difficult to follow, don't sweat it. But I would say that it's important to understand that that's not the afterlife. It's not the realm of the dead, but the realm of the forgotten. When you're around a bunch of people who are living like zombies and they're spiritless and they have no connection to the Most High, they don't even care. And you can tell people have no connection to them. You know, I can tell because I speak about God all the time. I've been speaking about God, you know, for over 40 years. I've been speaking about God, you know. So at this point, I've become tuned into when it's connecting from when it's not connecting, regardless of what people say. People will say, oh, interesting, or they'll have a cut, but you could tell some people don't have it in them. They don't have that breath in them at all. They are completely asleep. You see, regardless of what they tell you, and you can tell by their lack of manifestation, their lack of building. 10 years could go by and they're still struggling with the same thing, quote unquote, struggling, because people are not always struggling. They'll tell you, oh, I'm struggling with my ego. I'm struggling with my attitude. You're not struggling, because if you were struggling, it would have been fixed already. You know, we were given, and what was instilled inside of us was a sense of conquering, you know, an ability to conquer, an ability to achieve, an ability or a gift towards victory, you know. So when that's not happening, a lot of times it's just because you don't really want it to happen, but you've learned to say political statements around, yeah, I'm trying to get this together, I'm trying to get that together. So a lot of times, many of us are walking in the realm of forgotten. And it's not because you died that you're living in the realm of forgotten. It's because you woke up. That's the issue. You actually woke up. So this is why the spiritually aware often feel out of place in different spaces, because to remember your divine essence while surrounded by those who are enraptured in spiritual amnesia is really to exist in exile. You know, you've been born again, but not into a new life, but into a new revelation. So that revelation, what happens is that revelation of knowing and seeing, it sets you apart. You know, stagnation is it's a death. But Yah is movement. So that's why we speak about the Ruach, or the breath that was given to you in the beginning. Spirit moves, breath is spirit. So those who are still too long, they begin to rot, you know, and rot is not just a decay, it's a regression. So a spirit that doesn't grow eventually will become a toxic spirit. You know, it'll rot. You know, just like it's written in the scripture, let the dead bury the dead. So that's an instruction. It's a division. It's a separation, that there's a sacred boundary line between those who walk with intention and those who drift with the herd. Zombies move, but they're not alive. They move in herds. You know, they consume. They don't, but they don't, like I said, they don't transform. They're animated flesh without will, you know, instinct without inspiration. And like I said, there are many who are moving or living that sort of reality around us. And the more we stay around them, the more we start to see that as a possible, reasonable, and potential standard for ourselves. You know, because sometimes you can get even guilted into zombie living. You know, there might be certain get-togethers or quote unquote holidays and stuff like that. And people will say, oh man, well, you coming out to the such and such, or did you watch the game last night? Or did you see this award show or whatever? And you're almost made to feel like something's wrong with you if you didn't do something like this. After a while, you'll start to fall into it. You know, it's Yom Shishi, or it's Friday night, and you know everyone at the job is going out somewhere, and normally you don't. You know, and they say, well, "Come on, this is just what we do. This is what you do when you have a job." You know, so you get sort of guilted into the program. But if you think about it, what if your breath or your consciousness or your memory of Yah has placed you in a realm again, where everything is asleep. You'll have to realize that as an awakened person, I live in the land of the forgotten. Like we say things like, this is the land of time forgotten. I've been to certain towns and cities like that. But it's because from a spiritual perspective, you feel spiritually out of place, because of the fact that I've remembered my divine essence, which is somewhat of a qualification for royalty. Because I've remembered my divine essence, now it causes me to sort of not only be out of place, but now where everyone else is going against the natural grain, I'm going with and towards the natural grain, right? Sometimes, I did the segment, Ain't It Strange? And people will look at us like we're strange, like we're going against the grain. But the reality is we're going with the grain. That's the truth of it. They're going against the grain, So like I said, when you got people who are rotting like that, it's a regression. And a spirit that doesn't grow, it does turn into a toxic mess, and that's something that we always have to be in tune with and aware of, that potential. Now, there's a couple ways to look at this, and a couple ways I want to sort of look at that. I spoke many years ago, and one of the phrases that I said is that sleep is the cousin of death. And sleep being symbolic of spiritual unawareness, right? It was Yeshua that said, "Awake, O sleeper, and rise from the dead," right? That wasn't really talking about REM cycles, that type of sleep, but about a soul that was slumbering. And sleep implies a potential death, but it also implies a sort of permanence. So what's the danger of sleeping, right? Well, too much sleep and your window closes. You miss the trumpet, you miss your opportunity. When you read in the Vedas, sleep is always related to the tamas. And the tamas is one of the three gunas, or the three, what we call the foundational energies of nature, right? And the tamas are not just about rest per se, but it's the veil that conceals. It represents a darkness, an inertia, or what we could say an ignorance. And the weight of Maya, or the weight of illusion, it's the energy of resignation, of apathy, of unconscious repetition. So the tamas themselves, they're not necessarily evil inherently. In their proper place, they govern stability, they govern rest. But when that sleep dominates the psyche, it suffocates the soul. So the jiva, or the kiva, which is the individual consciousness that forgets its divine assignment, its purpose starts to become buried under the sleep. So that means your vision becomes clouded. Your desire for truth becomes dull. A tamasic being is one who is not just tired, but they are heavy with the weight of unreleased potential. They may move through the world, but they don't respond to it. They absorb, but they don't digest. They exist in what we could say like a fog, if you will. So the Vedas then teach that a person has to rise from tamas into rajas, which is the energy of movement, its passion, its fire, and then ultimately into sattva. And sattva is purity, it's clarity, it's divine harmony. And when you don't have that upward motion, the soul remains in bondage through this sort of loop, and there's a loop through lifetimes. It's kind of like a needle. Some of you may not be aware of albums, but like a needle, a song that's stuck into the groove of a needle. So now when a person becomes a traveler, the traveler not only awakens themselves, but they awaken others, because the traveler or the awakened one becomes a disturbance within the dream world. You see, that's why, again, a lot of times when you are one who is spiritually awake, which is really resurrected, you become an irritant to everyone else who's asleep. It's like the whistle in the graveyard. The presence of the traveler starts to call souls out of their hibernation. You see, so the zombies are the sleepless dead, the walking dead. They don't even rest. And that's probably the most terrifying part of a zombie. They can't wake up because they were never just asleep. They skipped the pause of reflection and went straight to consumption. They are the tamas in the flesh. So now we have the concepts of like memory and movement and divinity, which become so very important. To move is to remember. In both in the Quran and even in Hebraic traditions or Torah traditions, forgetfulness is one of the greatest ailments, we'll say, of the soul. In Islam, the word for human is insan or insin, and that's connected to nasain, meaning forgetfulness, or to forget. So humans forget their divine origin. That's why through salat and through dhikr, or what we call remembrance, those are means to reawaken and reconnect. Eid Mubarak, by the way, to all of my Muslim cousins and Muslim family. We're going through Eid right now. So in Hebraic tradition, remembrance is tied to identity. It's tied to covenant. So you'll have the command like, remember Yah, your Elohim. And the reason being is because to forget is to descend into slavery. And to live as one who is unaware of their inheritance is another form of slavery. That's forgetting. That's why you have the name Zakar. And Zakar means to remember, which is tied to the male principle of Adom, as I spoke about last insight. That's the one who remembers the seed, the one who remembers the law, the one who remembers the charge, right? So to remember is not just a mental thing, it's an activation. It's an awakening to yourself as Elohim. Very important point. And to forget is to live as a servant, but you're a servant who is lost in your own house. So now becoming the traveler, it moves, or the traveler moves rather, because the traveler remembers. So each step becomes like a drumbeat of their own memory. Each step, with each step, they're getting their memory back. And there's a rhythm that's starting to say, like, I'm not a beast, I'm not a slave, I'm not a ghost, I'm not the forgotten, I'm the image and the breath of the cosmic creator, you see. But in order to get that, one has to move. There has to be a step. It can't just be imparted to you. When you look at the Kabbalion, you have the law of rhythm, right? And the law of rhythm teaches everything flows. There's an in and there's an out. And every high thing is followed by a low thing. And every breath is followed by an exhale. Every inhale has an exhale. And that's not a random sort of quality. It's a calibration of the divine. So when you walk the path of honor, you walk the path of rhythm. So just like seasons change, your bodies grow, nations, they rise, they fall. In scripture, we see 6 days of work and 1 day of rest, our Sabbath. We see different feasts. We see the jubilees, right? So we see where the Most High operates in pulse, just pulsations, and the stagnant person will always resist the rhythm. They will grip and grab onto a false security and stop moving. I'm going to hold on right here. Whereas a traveler it doesn't move just for motion's sake. The traveler knows when to pause. The traveler knows when to march. The traveler knows when to run, or when to ascend, because rhythm itself is a wisdom. Rhythm itself is a trust. You look at Ezekiel 37, where it talks about the valley of the dry bones, right? And the bones start to come together, the sinew, the flesh, and then finally the breath, which was the last thing. That order matters, because first you have to put the frame together, then you put the function together, then you put the force together. So breath is spirit, and spirit is movement, and movement is life. So without the breath, all the structure, it's a beautiful sculpture, it's impressive, but it's lifeless. So without spirit, you might look the part, but you will never rise. You see, the traveler understands that breath must return, that, Yah's rhythm has to be restored, that we're not just a people, but we're instruments, right? And instruments, they got to be in tune. If they're not in tune, they're not any use to the orchestra, and the orchestra is the orchestra of the kingdom. So you got to be tuned up, right? Even when you're still, your soul is moving. We have visions, we have meditations, dreams, as some of you call it. Those are all vehicles. The Quran speaks about the nocturnal or the nightly or the journey of the soul, where it says it is Allah who takes the souls at the time of their death, and those that do not die during their sleep, then he keeps those for which he has decreed. And then the Quran says he has decreed some for death, and in others he releases for a specified term. That's the Surah Az-Zumar. So when you look at that surah, it kind of speaks about there's a deeper mystery of the soul or the spirit really leaving the body even when you're sleeping, which many have experienced, like sleep paralysis. But some spirits or souls don't return. So then that tells you that sleep itself is a rehearsal for death, and the awakening is a rehearsal for the resurrection. When you look at Al-Fajr, the Quran talks about, "O tranquil soul, return to your Lord. Return to your Lord well pleased and pleasing to him." So that's not just a one-time sort of resurrection. It's a process of ascension. The soul matures, and it matures across different phases. Each journey, every single test, if you will, becomes like a stair step back to divine union with the Almighty, with the Creator. In Ecclesiastes 12:7, when you want to compare that with the Hebraic teachings, it talks about the return of the breath, or the soul journeys through testing. It journeys through purification. It's often in the wilderness, is often in the mountain, or in exile. So your physical walk becomes the reflection of your soul's mission. So a lot of times you're not just walking and moving to escape Babylon, like what we do, on our retreats and stuff like that. But what we're doing is we're walking into covenant. The retreats that we do are a reflection of our covenant with the Creator, where we're all together. It's like a mini kingdom, if you will, or an exercise, a practice wedding. What do they call those? Like the dinner rehearsal, or whatever, the wedding rehearsals where they have the dinner and they do everything as if it was the actual wedding. And that's what really makes the difference, because someone who's caught in the zombie or the zombie mind, they flee pain. Whereas travelers move towards their purpose, whether that puts them in the mountains or puts them in the wilderness or whatever. They recognize that the journey of the soul is not a straight line. It's a spiral, and it can be a descent that's sort of wrapped in forgetfulness, or it could be a return that's carved out of breath and fire and remembrance. So when you look at the Quran, it tells us that it is Allah who takes the souls at their time. Like when I say with Azumar, that's 3942, the surah. So once you start to realize that, okay, the soul leaves the body even during sleep, and there are opportunities for ascension or remembrance, which is really the key. The key, and one of the most important things is for us to be able to remember. When you start to realize that we as a people were created from different substances: dust, clay, fluid, black mud, blood. And remember the term Adama or Adam means blood. They're not contradictory. They're layers of creation. If you look at them all, they all have different densities. So each one is thicker than the last one before it. Each one binds the soul purpose a little more tightly to the flesh. So when you forget your essence, you're living only in one layer of your creation. But when you remember, you're rising through the different layers of your own density. Whether it's Vedic or it's Islamic teachings, the self moves through various levels. You have the commanding self, which is the al-amara, which is like the tamas, that's bound by desire, inertia, ignorance even. You have the blaming self, which we call the rajas, or the al-lawama. And that's to be awakened, but also conflicted at times. Then you have the tranquil self, or the soul, which is the sattva, or the al-mutma'inah in Arabic. That's the luminous self. And that mirrors the soul's sort of alchemical climb from clay to form, to function, from a vessel of just vibration. So we weren't made to just dwell in the dust or to dwell in the clay alone, if you will. And those who are seeking truth and those who are traveling, they remember that. They're able to say, like, hey, man, I'm not just made from earth because I'm animated by breath. I didn't just fall from the heavens to stay fallen. I descended to ascend. Wherever I came from, I can go back to. So every step towards remembrance is a part of my resurrection. It's not just this huge leap. Every layer that I peel back is my initiation. So when you're moving as a traveler, you're moving as the enlightened one. It's not to escape, but it's to remember. It's not just to live, but to rise, in your living or in your life. That's why resurrection is important to understand. And resurrection itself is not just about being restored, but it's about taking responsibility. And you're taking responsibility for what led to your fall in the first place. A lot of people, they stay buried, not because the Creator hasn't called them out. That's not why they stay in a rut or buried in a certain place. They stay buried because they refuse to face the truth of how they got there to begin with. How did you get to where you're at in your fall? There are people who spiritualize everything except for their own choices. And if you can't take accountability, you'll never rise. You can't rise if you refuse to account. We can blame trauma. We can blame the season. We can blame energy. But if we never take the time to trace back the path of our own thinking, we'll never rise. The flesh doesn't act on its own. We already know that because the light shone into the darkness and the darkness comprehended it not. Your flesh is generally pretty innocent. It is your thinking that causes you to do what you do. The flesh, it responds to what the mind permits. And many of the traps that we find ourselves falling into, we walked into those traps willingly because we never disciplined our thoughts. And bad thinking, of course, will lead to bad decisions, in a very simplified way. And bad decisions, they create an even heavier body, not just physically, but energetically. When you think about, for those who struggle with their weight, why? It's because of the decisions that you have made. So if we just look at it from a physical perspective and not just solely focus on the energetic or the spiritual, the decisions that you make lead to a heavier body. A heavier body makes it more difficult for you to rise. So whether you're talking about your energetic body or your physical body, the truth is, when you suppress your consciousness, and when you ignore where your convictions should be, and when you repeat dysfunctional patterns without correction, you're not just creating consequences for yourself, you're creating extra weight. You're creating weight, and spiritual weight, emotional weight, physical weight. You create those things. And what happens is the soul then begins to sit lower in the body. Now we call that low vibrational. So what happens is your vibration now drops. You see, and once your vibration drops, your intuition becomes very foggy. Up here it gets foggy. Your energy starts to feel very slow. You become hard to move. You become hard to move in body. You become hard to move in spirit. So that's the people who you'll be talking to. It's like, man, they act like they just won't get it. No matter what I say, we end up in the same place. The person's, I don't know. You feel like I always use the analogy, I'm trying to set fire to a wet rag. That's a person who has all this weight that their vibration is so low that it's almost impossible to move them. I can't move them. And even within themselves, they're energetically, they feel slow and they feel heavy. And that's why when you start talking truth, you can see the look on their face where it's like, oh, they start breathing like that. Oh, the breathing gets heavy. Oh, Papa, Big Papa, baby. It's they start feeling like that because feeling the thought even becomes too hard. That's why resurrection is not just a spiritual thing. It's a psychological thing. When you really look at what resurrection is, you have to connect to the higher mind, which is the seat of divine intelligence. And that higher or divine intelligence, it sees your patterns very clearly. And with a lot of courage, it can break them. The Most High gives us the power to resurrect, but also gives you the power to, or I would say the command, rather, to examine yourself. When you look at 1 Corinthians 11:28, it says, let a man or a woman examine themselves. So if you want to start to rise, you got to ask yourself, like, what habits that I've decided that I've chosen to keep alive are keeping me dead? What weight do I have that I have agreed to carry, that Yah never told me to pick up? What weight is it that's keeping me earthbound? What thoughts am I rehearsing that keep me in fear, that keep me in shame? Resurrection, it starts when you stop lying to yourself. When you stop lying to yourself, you'll realize that the grave is made of dirt. But the real burial, it happens when you decide to go into denial. Denial is a form of burial and death. And yes, Yahuwah can raise you, but Yahuwah expects you to remove the stone after you're raised from in front of your tomb, or your crypt, if you will. Even in this month, the 6th, we're in the 6th month, man. That's the 6 is represented. That's responsibility. That's domestic alignment. It's structure. It's sacrifice. 6 is a number where you when you get away from indulgence and get closer to structure. And you already know we're in the year of the 9. That's the year of eldership, of being a true Jegna, of becoming mature, and judgment, because we're at the end. It's not a time for emotionalism. It's a time to recognize patterns and to take decisive moves towards correction. So if you say you want to rise, you have to be honest about inventorying your own patterns. Like, what cycles do you keep repeating? Where is your attention most of the time, especially when you wake up? Where's your energy? Where's your time? Where's your attention? Name them. Don't excuse them, but put names to them, not excuses. You got to confront yourself what you have enabled. And because of many of your tombs and your crypts, you built them by hand. Not everything that buried you was forced upon you. You got to be honest about what you allowed, what you invited, what you accepted. The lack of discipline of your own mind. Movement, it begins with thought. So you have to rewire your reflexes. You got to stop indulging every single emotional impulse. And some of us, we'll call it self-care. That's just the tamas, your inertia dressed up as healing. That's all that is, man. When we go off or we indulge in things that we know we shouldn't indulge in, and just don't want to be honest about the fact that we're just completely feeding root chakra energy. Say, oh, well, I'm self-healing, or I'm taking a me day, I'm doing me, and all these silly things that we put excuses to, to lighten the body and to remove the excess weight, which slows down your resurrection, whether it be spiritual or physical. You got to detox your intake. So that means detoxing from the entertainment that you're watching, the voices that you may be listening to, the food that you may be eating, detoxing your environment. You have to look at, what am I carrying? Am I carrying what supports my calling or what keeps me from my calling? Being able to connect to righteous order. None of us ascend in isolation. Resurrection was always a communal sort of experience. When you look at the Valley of the Dry Bones, Musa walked with the people. Your walk needs structure, accountability, a fellowship of covenant. You have to set a direction that's measurable. There can't be ambiguity, because vague intentions don't rise. That's why you'll have a wish your entire life. Man, I wish I had this, or I wish I was doing. It's vague. Vague intentions never rise. You have to be specific, because specificity. I know I said that wrong. It's a spiritual thing. It's spiritual. Spirit. A lot of times people go into spirituality because they don't want to be specific. They don't want rules. They don't want laws. They don't want discipline. So they feel like within spirituality, I can do me and follow my feelings. But that's actually the opposite of spirituality. Spirituality is very specific. It asks, what is your assignment? Where are you going today? Where are you going this month? What is your goal? Who are you building with? You see, that's spirituality. Being a zombie is non-specific. If you're a traveling woman or you're a traveling man, you are called to walk through the Deadlands and carry the breath of the Most High Creator, originator of all the cosmos, through the Deadlands. So you got to stop lying down in comfort graves. You got to stop living inside of the loop. Stop calling mental, emotional, spiritual disorder your personality. That's just who I am. I'm just like that. Stop. That's a sick loop. And that's a comfort grave. I'm gonna just lay down in this grave for a little while. Every step that you take, it must be a reflection of your higher convictions. Every move that you make should reflect covenant. Because we're in a season now of resurrection. And movement is resurrection. Okay? So I wanted to tap upon that just with the concept of being a traveling man or a traveling woman. And, I know we went through several chambers, Masonic chambers, chambers of the Quran, chambers of the Vedas, chambers of the Torah, and of course, psychological chambers. But they're all connected and they're all looped in together. They're all one. Okay, so now before I shake the spot, I want to speak about something real quick. I was asked a question. This was actually a while ago, to be honest, in the Facebook group, the ANU Life Global Village Facebook group. Again, if you're not a member, if you're not a member, you are invited to join. It's a public group, so you ain't really you don't have to do much, but I do encourage participation. I know a lot of times on social media, people just do sort of the least amount of effort sometimes. You could ask a question on social media and you'll just get reactions, thumbs up and dislikes. But that's just a sign, a lot of times you're talking to zombies on these platforms. So that's because I've had people, kind of express their frustration with that to me. Like, you asked this question or you said share this in the comments and people just click thumbs up. It's like, yeah, people are asleep. They didn't hear what I just said. They're asleep. So you or sometimes people are very lazy, but I had opened up a post maybe a couple storms ago where I asked if anyone had any questions or whatever. And there was a couple questions posted. I'm going to address one today. I did say I was going to do a second video for it, but I actually did not. And I said, you know what? I'm not going to let another Sabbath go by where I don't answer. I'm going to start chopping through these questions. So this was one that was asked by Alicia in the group. And she said she had asked a question about asset protection. I probably should have gotten my tablet or something so I could read the question. But it was about asset protection. And she was saying, or asking rather, how do you hold your property for your children so that they have access and control for generations with the least amount of governmental or third party intrusion? And she was saying that, I know you can use LLCs and I know you can use trusts, but again, they require someone to have like third party, access, like there's a beneficiary or there's a trustee that's in charge of the administration of the holding entity. So I want to answer that question. Now, Alicia, you already know, as I've said it, I hate single mother questions. I'm going to answer Alicia's questions because she's good money. She's cool. But in general, the problem with a lot of these questions is that a lot of times, even though people don't want to admit it or say it, but a lot of times these questions are related to sisters not having men, you know, and these are questions that should be worked out among the family, you know, or even if you don't have a man, you should have a covering. That's the truth of it. And I know people get offended when I speak like that because Satan has such a strong grip over your brain that when I start speaking about what should be with family, you get offended and you say things like, well, where's the men? The men are here. It's just that you're not a real woman. That's why you don't have them. That's all. There's plenty of men here. Plenty of men. And even if there wasn't plenty of men, there are enough men who will engage in polygyny. But you'll say things like, well, I respect it, but it's not for me, or something like that, which is always silly. I let people say that and I don't say anything because I'm never one to argue for or against anything. But you're just selfish. You're just selfish, and you're operating from a low vibration. That's all. And I know, again, that sounds like strong language and stuff. And you say, oh, you tell me if I'm not polygynous or I'm not open to that, then yes, I am. I am. So you telling me a polygynous man is better than a monogamous man? Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, a lot of times brothers will say things like, well, I can't do polygyny, man, because one woman is headache enough. That's a sign of something. No woman should be a headache. She should be a blessing. So that means you got a woman ruling over you. So not only are you not qualified for polygyny, you ain't qualified for monogamy. You ain't qualified for nothing other than to go back to school and learn women and learn how to be a man. That's that. The things a lot of times that we negate in family are things that are very personal, that, again, we try to hold on to our disorders and say that they're our personality. Well, I'm a very jealous person. That's a sickness. That's not a personality trait. That's a sickness. It's like me saying, well, I'm a very violent person. I can't talk things out. I just start hitting and stabbing and punching. That's not a personality trait. That's a dysfunction. All right. So I'm just going to say that. And I know, again, people get offended. You know, you got to know by now. I don't care. I've been saying it for the long. You got to know by now. I don't care. Because I'm right. If I wasn't right, maybe, yeah, I would probably care. But if I wasn't right, I wouldn't open my mouth. I wouldn't say anything if I was not 100% right in what I'm saying. I am 100% right in what I'm saying. You know, a lot of times we're trying to figure out how to live within our dysfunction, as I spoke about last strong, you know, and ride with me, Alicia. Stay with me. Keep riding. She might be like, dang, I just asked one question. But this is for all the sisters. All the sisters who are trying to figure out how to dry up their libido so that they can be by themselves and then get hordes and cohorts of men to function as surrogate husbands for them. And sometimes in a very sick and disgusting and deviant way, they turn their sons and their daughters into their husbands and boyfriends. It's disgusting. So I'm just saying that for everyone listening. I'm going to answer Alicia's question because that's the homie. But in general, most 90% of your single mother questions, get a man or get a covering. And if you're unwilling to do both, you got a deeper problem there. And I don't want to support you anyway. I don't want to support rebellious people. Why? There ain't no men to come under. Yes, there is. There are plenty of men that you know that know more than you. Even if they're not the most perfect men, they're better than you. And that's the natural order of things, whether it's your uncle, a cousin, a stepfather, a father, you know, just some OG on the block who sits on his stoop playing a djembe drum every day and just, you know, kicking wisdom to people who walk by. Go ask him to be your covering. It's better than what you have now where you're outside. I can get into that at another time, but sisters are not supposed to be outside. Sisters are supposed to be inside the house. They're not supposed to be running from house, as the scriptures talk about silly women who go from house to house. They're supposed to be in the house. What does it mean to be in the house? You have a head. You have a covering. Not a covering by name, because some women will come and say, well, so-and-so is my covering, but they don't listen to anything he says. They're always rebellious. He's got to wrestle with them. When you have a covering, you have a master. There is no wrestling. There's no wrestling. What the master says goes. That's that. And I know many of you, that's what you don't want, because you want to be your own master. I did the breakdown on that on the Jezebel segment. So go back and watch that, and you'll get a better understanding of that. All right. But again, this isn't to you, Alicia. Not 100% to you. But it's just for anyone who has single, unwed mother questions. Get a covering. Get a covering. A man, not Ia, not mama, a man. It doesn't have to be a sexual thing. It doesn't have to be someone you're attracted to. When you're getting a covering, it's best that you're not even attracted to the person, and that they're not attracted to you, so that what they're sharing with you is purely objective and purely out of love. And that should not be a permanent condition. Your covering should be on his job to find you a man, and you should be supporting and helping in that effort. That's what's natural and normal. All right. Now, so to answer your question, Alicia, I would say this. It's a powerful question. It's a crucial one. I'm sure that there are many people with the same question. I'm glad you asked it. For anyone who's concerned about their legacy, of course, would have that question. I think it's a great one. When we speak about asset protection, yes, there are common legal vehicles. A trust is a vehicle, an LLC is a vehicle, and those are tools. You got to see them as that, but they're not solutions, by themselves. I'm going to first speak about what I shared in the ANU Way, where I spoke about the importance of the spiritual and the cultural teachings, because one of the things that I said in the ANU Way is that education is the first and primary defense against poverty. If the children have no financial education, they will squander and they'll lose the assets anyway. If there's no financial education, that's just a reality. That happens every day. It's just a reality. A trust, yes, a trust protects against probate, and a trust protects against creditors. Okay, so just to be clear, trust is not like a stamp of a cure-all. It protects against creditors and probate, but it does not protect against ignorance. A trust doesn't protect against greed. A trust doesn't protect against foolishness. So without preparation, the next generation, they could simply just liquidate or destroy whatever was built that they inherited. So the ANU Way of legacy building stresses, I would say, in our community, a layered sort of preparation. And layered in the sense that there has to be financial literacy. There's got to be financial literacy first, so that heirs will know how to manage, they'll know how to invest, and they'll know how to protect. Okay, that's number one. They got to know how to manage, invest, and protect. And then there has to be a spiritual literacy. Why is spiritual literacy important? Because if they don't know why they're protecting the assets, and know that it's for continuity, whether it be for spiritual continuity, cultural continuity, or familial continuity, again, they would just squander it, right? Then you have the cultivation of leadership that is really important, so that the successors, they are qualified. Now, why is that important? Because you want your successors to be qualified and not just entitled. Some people deal with the curse of entitled children before they even depart. Like you might get older and the child your child is pocket watching you. Like, I know you got it. Come on, I know you got it. You got good credit. Let me put this land in your name. Let me put this house in your name. Help me out with the down payment. Because what do you spend your money on? You don't go anywhere. I know you got them. So that you want to build leadership within your children so that they're not entitled, but they're qualified. Then there's that sense of, or that science of cultural integrity, where you now begin to break the normalization of destructive standards and foreign standards that would cause them to lose everything. This is something I kind of spoke about in the book Noir Male. And I spoke about the dangers of cultural disinheritance, through normalization and through social engineering. So Noir Male is a good one. So now, if I'm looking at also your sort of more crucial point about intrusion and about administration, yes, most trusts require third-party administrators or even court oversight, and in some other cases. And this is why many legacy focused or legacy centered families, they employ, I would say, a few lesser known remedies. One would be a PFTC, and a PFTC is a private family trust company, a private family trust contract. So when you're using a private family trust contract, or even a ecclesiastical or private ministry trust, you have different sort of options. Those trusts, which are usually referenced under private law, they allow for a couple things that I think work well for what you're asking. They allow for private trustees and family boards, and there's no mandatory public filings, right? So when you have faith-based, like if we're looking at a ecclesiastical trust, when you have faith-based jurisdiction or private law, where the trust operates under agreed upon religious, spiritual, or cultural law, again, you have a bit more autonomy. You also have very, very minimized statutory intrusion. So when you're using a ministry trust or ecclesiastical trust, you'll usually qualify for those, if you have a private religious organization, which is not difficult to establish. Also, PMAs, or what are called private membership associations, they can be used to shield and protect family assets, and family held activities from different levels of governmental oversight when you use them and you establish them in the right way. Now, when you pair that with dynasty trust, or what we call irrevocable trust, LLC, holding companies, and a succession plan, a clear, succession plan, now you've created layers of protection. So you have this fortress now that's really layered, So ultimately, I would say the legal vehicles, they are important. The legal vehicles are important, but financial, cultural, and spiritual education and formation of the family is what ensures that those things remain effective after you're gone. So without this, no structure's going to survive more than a generation or two. If you don't have the literacy in place, the spiritual knowing in place, the cultural understanding in place. And we've seen examples of it. I think I shared even like with the Vanderbilts, and, where the next generation can squander millions upon millions of dollars because they didn't have the education that survived their own folly, and their own sense of entitlement, you know? So that's how I would answer that question. And I know it probably started off pretty rough for a lot of you. But is he going to answer or not? Yes, but you're going to get it the way I give it. That's what's going to happen. You're going to get it. You're going to get it how I give it. All right. Again, we need to return to our proper ancestral structure. That is the greatest protection for everyone. The man, the woman, the children, the elders, the community. Not creating these Frankenstein families, as I've said so many times, and these hodgepodges because you're following the laws of Babylon that is allowing you to call what is not right, right. We got to stop that. We got to stop that, man, because we're so bent on being defiant. We're so bent on our rebelliousness that, you know, we come in and we get lessons and information from people like me and say, okay, cool. Now, how can I work that into Satan's kingdom? And it doesn't work. It'll work in the short term because that's part of the temptation. But I promise you, you're going to fall flat on your face. You always do. I've been watching it for years. So the energy that you want to put into what you're doing is, all right, how do I reestablish? And like I said, you might say, well, for some of you sisters listening, well, I can't get a man right now. I've been on Bumble and Hinge, I think it's one of them, you know what I'm talking about, Hinge or Hitch, one of them. I know that's one of them. And Christian Meat, that's all I got. But you know, I've been in the trenches, you know, and it hasn't been working out. Probably because you are not what you think you are. And that's where covering comes in too, because sometimes there's situations where you need a man to just tell you honestly, this is what the issue is, and this is why it's not working out for you. Because you might be choosing based on, again, your dysfunctional patterns. You're in a loop, you know, and whenever someone seeks to pull you out of that loop with truth, what happens? You get offended. So it might be on a date. I've had that happen before. I've asked simple questions. I don't really date, but, you know, in conversation, simple questions. And I've seen people get triggered and spaz out. And I mean simple questions, you know. I remember asking somebody once, his sister who had a child, and I said, you were with your child? She told me for a long time. They were like high school sweethearts. I said, did you guys ever consider having more than one child? You just wanted the one? And she spazzed out because that was some trauma that she was holding. Why would you ask me about that? Why? Because you sitting here talking about it. What are you talking about? You know, not that I'm particularly interested, you know, but I do want to know why your relationship failed. But now I know it was you. You know, so it's good when you have that covering, because you sometimes you need to be able to work out those issues. And like I always say, in a low pressure situation, you know, it's just like there's been times when my aunties and my older, you know, my female elders have told me things that I wouldn't necessarily maybe have received in the same way if my lover told me those things. You know, so in a low pressure situation, I was able to kind of get my act together in certain areas based on what they told me, but it would have hit different if it was somebody that had opened up my vulnerability to, you know, in a different sort of intimate way. All right. So with that, again, I want to thank you all for being present and coming through. And we have our retreat coming up this Yom Shishi. So for some of you, I will see you at the retreat soon enough. You know, make sure you bring the stuff that you need to bring. We're going to be camping. So you got to make sure, you know, bring your headlights, not lights. Your headlights, you know, if you're someone who doesn't, I prefer walking by moonlight. And you might want to just try it. Your eyes will adjust. You'll be surprised. I know some people get real like scared to walk in the dark, outside when you're in the woods or campsites. But you'd be surprised, man, your eyes really do adjust. But the more you use the flashlights and stuff, the longer it takes for your eyes to adjust to its own night vision, But nonetheless, I look forward to seeing you all pretty soon in a few days and fellowshipping with you and seeing how you've been and breathing the same air as you, and doing some of the beautiful experiences that I have planned for us to do together. All right. So I can't wait for that. All right. So until such time, I'll be seeing some of you soon. And then some of the other ones I'll be seeing next Sabbath for our next insight. All right. Until such time, this has been Chief Yuya, head Jugna of the ANU Nation and the ANU Life Global Ministries. Shalom.